Welcome to the ACTS reading series. In April 2020, ACTS was supposed to host 4 New Brunswick poets here in the ACTS Gallery as part of National Poetry Month. But of course the pandemic hit, so we had to change direction. Instead, we invited the poets one at a time here to the ACTS Gallery to offer readings and have conversations with Dr. Sinclair, acting as moderator. Sue is a poet herself. She has written 5 collections of poetry, and her most recent, Heaven's Thieves, won the Pat Lowther Award. Sue is also editor at Brick Books and the Fiddlehead Literary Magazine, and she teaches creative writing at UNB Fredericton. I hope you enjoy these readings and conversations, and I appreciate your patience as this technology is new to ACTS and we're figuring it out as we go. Thanks very much and enjoy.
Welcome to the ACTS Arts and Culture Centre here in Sussex. We're on Wolastoqiyik and Mi'kmaq territory here. And it's my pleasure to be introducing to you Allan Cooper, who lives mostly in Alma, I believe.
50-50 Alma.
50-50 and Riverview, am I right?
Yeah.
Was founder of Owl's Head Press, which, among other things, put out a beautiful translation of Francis Ponge's poems, translated by Robert Bly. And I was so delighted when I discovered that that little book came out of New Brunswick. That was a lovely moment for me. He himself has written 14 books of poetry. He's a 2-time winner of the Alfred G. Bailey Award for Poetry. I had thought that your most recent book was Everything We've Loved Comes Back to Find Us, but in fact, it is Waiting for the Small Ship of Desire, which just came out this year. Allan is also a songwriter and a performer, and I will turn things over to Allan. Welcome.
Nice to see you, thanks.
You too.
I've been working on a new book of poems recently, and I don't know when I'm going to finish it, but it's probably going to take another couple of years, which is a new departure. I'm going to read a couple of poems at some point today. I don't know exactly what point you want me to read some poems, but I'll let you.
Oh, I was figuring this was the cue. This was the, please read some poems for us, and then we'll have a conversation.
Okay.
Does that work for you?
That's perfect. I started writing this book during a very dry period in my writing, and I didn't know how I was going to get started again. So what I did is I was outside one afternoon, and I was thinking about a few things, and I thought, why don't I just write about what I'm thinking about when I can't write poems? So I took a notebook and I started jotting down lines, and I brought all kinds of things going back to my grandfather playing the piano when I was a young child. He was a frustrated musician and artist. And I would find lines about my granddaughter and the things that she was doing. So one of the first poems I wrote in this series was called The Light That Moves Through Everything. And it starts with, I want to write a poem. So I'm bringing in all these little moments. The light that moves through everything. I want to write a poem that brings things back to me again. My granddaughter sitting in her wagon, surveying her kingdom of rocks and streams and fallen leaves. My daughter sleeping on the floor beside me as I worked. My father sitting in his chair, doing crossword puzzles and smoking his pipe as he tallied the gains and losses of his life. His father before him playing Will Your Anchor Hold, or Jerusalem, as the snow fell slow outside the window. I want to bring my friend inside this poem, John Thompson, talking to my mother and father, his face so young it startled me. I watched from the edge of my dream a man who had outlived them all. I want to bring the animals I've loved and fed to this poem. They wander away into a day that will never end. I want to bring birds fallen from branches, words tethered which I now let go, as we all must let go in the end. What is it that feeds us? What in the world stays with us after the contrails of our lives burn down like a long summer dusk that lingers into the dark? I hear words I spoke to my mother at her time of dying. I hear old voices catching in the river willows, but there's no one else here. Or perhaps it's a light inside everything that says, I move through all things equally, the loved and the lost, and this is the measure you must draw from your days. So that was an early poem, and it ended up being one of the last poems in the manuscript. And I started going through notebooks, and I found these little 2- and 3-line poems, almost haiku-like. Mm-hmm. And some of them were unfinished, some of them were longer, so I started whittling at those. So I think the process of writing for this book was very much a departure for me.
I had sort of imagined that you would read some poems and then we would talk, but I actually, as you were reading this one, I had a question. So do you want to just try moving with it?
Yeah, whatever, yeah.
I was thinking about the spirit of like, I want to bring my friend to this poem. I want to bring the animals to the poem. This like, I want to bring all these things into the poem. And I was thinking about Sue Goyette, Nova Scotia poet, talking about poetry as really an act of hospitality. And I was getting that feeling from this poem. Like I want to bring these things to the poem as like as like a host. Does that seem to fit to you?
Oh, it fits really well.
Yeah.
When I meet with students, I often say, they'll often say, "What do your poems mean?" And then I say, "Well, what do they mean to you?" Mm-hmm. And then they'll say, "Well, this is what it means to me." And I said, "Well, you're invited into the poem to find what the poem means to you, and that's what the poem means."
Right, yeah, it's that like gathering point.
Yeah, so a poem is like a receptacle for your own life, if you get into a poem. That's the way I look at it. And so these poems, I try to make the poems as if people could get inside them and find something. And if they don't find it, maybe they'll find it in the next poem. Or the next, you know.
Yeah, so that sense of invitation very much
is
part of what you're up to there.
Yes, I've known Sue for a long time, and she's really got that warmth to her.
Anyway, I didn't want to sidetrack you too much from reading,
but there's another poem in here. A few years ago, I did some translations. Actually, I spent all one fall and all one winter translating Rilke's Reno Elegy.
Beautiful.
And I'd wanted to do it since I first read them. And during the process of looking through the Rilke, I found a poem that he had written, an elegy that she considered, that's Marina Tsveteva, she considered it the 11th elegy. Mm-hmm. And then she wrote a long poem called New Year's, and back to him, not knowing he died. Mm-hmm. But during that process, I started working on this poem, which is called The Winter Oak, and it talks about the relationship between Marina Tsveteva and Rilke. What would it be like if we really saw each other? Would that energy overwhelm us? Or as Marina Tsveteva said to Rilke, would we be completely healed, completely whole, like light moving through apple blossoms in spring? Would we come to a place where language ends and becomes birdsong? Would it be like seeing a cell dividing, the glow of the body of someone in love, like putting our ear to the trunk of an oak and hearing for the first time the rings beginning to grow? Ring after ring, All of our losses and our grief transformed into light and healing power. For the only way we can move forward is like this. Part of us is already home, like the winter oak, the bare branches clear against the sky, no longer caring if the darkness continues to fall. And I found when I was writing these poems, some of them started taking very regular stanza forms. A lot of my early work was free verse. So I started working, rather than just having the long lines going on, and finding little internal rhymes. And I don't force that in my writing. I try to let that just happen.
Stay open to it.
Yeah. And I was early on influenced by Dylan Thomas. And because I'm a musician, I'm very aware of the music of poetry, of language.
Right.
And I often sit down and listen to music when I'm writing in the background, to get a feel for the rhythms of language.
I was feeling, as you were reading this poem, that for me it was taking on slightly different energy hearing it during the pandemic when we're so distanced from each other.
Yes,
I mean, here
yes,
we are, you and I,
literally.
literally distanced from each other.
Yeah.
And that line somehow, what would it be like if we really saw each other, just made me think about like craving an extra kind of presence, Yeah. And it's that presence that we don't really have right now.
That's true.
As we do our air hugs across the room here. So it's just interesting to hear how a poem takes on a different resonance in the sort of the current situation.
Yeah, and I've been finding that in reading other people's work, or listening to John Lennon's song "Isolation." It takes on a whole different feel.
Yeah.
We're afraid of the sun. We're afraid of everyone. Those kinds of things that come through in his song.
Especially at the beginning of the pandemic, I think that feeling afraid of everyone.
Oh, it was huge, yeah.
Like not making eye contact in the street.
No, exactly. But then gradually people would be out for walks with masks and stuff, and then you'd be there and you'd feel alone and somebody would raise their hand or smile.
Yeah, people make extra efforts, I think, to be sort of friendly in other ways.
Yeah, in other ways, yeah.
Would this be a moment to ask you about your experience with poetry during the pandemic?
Sure.
Either as a reader or a writer or...
Yeah, well, I found it really difficult to write. And you and I were talking earlier, and you said that a lot of writers were having trouble, completing stuff. And it's funny how that happened, because I wasn't expecting it. I thought I could write more.
Right.
But then I couldn't concentrate.
Like here's this moment of real urgency.
So I've got this, and I can sit down and write this, and I get one line in, or a line and a half, and I couldn't concentrate.
Was there anything in there also about like feeling disoriented? Like you don't have your bearings? So how do you write from like, I don't know where I am?
Yeah, I felt more comfortable indoors than outdoors. Although when we were in Alma, we could get out around because we have 3 acres there, so we could roam around, whatever.
Yeah.
I felt safer in the country than in the city.
And safer in New Brunswick, I think, than perhaps elsewhere.
Yeah. It was pretty good here because we have such a small population. It's scattered. Yeah.
So have you moved out of that initial feeling of
Still there.
Stalled? Yeah.
It's still there, but I did write a few poems recently. I'm going to read 1 or 2 of those later.
Do you ever have a fallow period after the publication of a book? Is this a thing for you?
I used to.
Yeah.
But there was one point when I was probably 15 years ago, where I said, "The heck with this fallow period. I'm going to write articles. And then I'll translate, because I've done a lot of translations over the years, and that now I work every day on a poem or a few lines or whatever every day. I don't have necessarily a set time, although it's usually evening that's best. So I'll work every day. Yeah, even New Year's Day.
That seems an excellent time to write. I mean, that's a great time of reflection, isn't it? New Year's Day.
Yeah.
Might I invite you to read another poem?
Sure. I'll get into a couple of the new ones at the end.
Sure, that'd be great.
There's another one here that I wrote almost 2 weeks to the day after, to the minute after my mother died. She died early in the morning. And she was one of those very creative people. She worked for the Department of Education for years. But she introduced me to John Thompson because she was taking courses from him. And she encouraged me to write poetry. But she's always a very spiritual person, to an extent in a traditional way, because she was a member of the United Church of Canada. But beyond that, she had ideas at the time. She was one of the only...
She had ideas.
Yes,
That's a great line.
because she was a working woman. And a lot of people looked down at that time. She started working, back in the 40s in Ottawa during the war. Well, before that, she worked as a school teacher in rural schools in New Brunswick back in the 30s. But she wrote poetry. And to me, she brought me a book of E.E. Cummings poetry when I was just, 12 or 13.
Wow.
And it made me realize that I could write poetry too. So this is from a dream, which I had almost to the second or minute after, 2 weeks after she died. It's called 2 Weeks. I woke from the dream in the middle of the night, almost 2 weeks to the minute after you died. My wife and daughter were waiting at the open door of your old bedroom. There were 2 bookcases at the back of the room where the headboard of your bed used to be. You stood in the middle of the room. You beckoned to Katie and bent down and hugged her and kissed her. Then you gestured to Laurie and held her and kissed her. Then they left the room. You called me in with your hand, but I wasn't to touch you. It seemed that the bond between us was too strong, and you were protecting me from being drawn into the other world. You walked to the bookcases, lined with so many of your books, then turned around and looked me straight in the eye. You raised your hands and face. My spirit went straight up, you said. So there are about 8 poems in that sequence. And at the time, I didn't realize that I was loading the lines with a lot of emotion. Sometimes it's hard to read them. Just because of... I came back... there's another one here I'll read as well.
This sounds a tremendously comforting dream.
Yeah, it was...
My spirit went straight up.
Yeah. I mean, it was just... And it was so real. I mean, my daughter was 10 years younger than she was at the time when she died. But the dream cut in like a movie reel. And she looked like she did a few years before she died. But it was very real.
Was it hard to translate the vividness of that moment in a dream into a poem?
I just wrote it down. I wrote it down in a diary. And I had to whittle it a lot later on. But I said, I'm just going to write down the whole thing.
Yeah.
And that one phrase was at the end.
Yeah.
And first I was going to have a 4-line poem, which is this and that, and then what she said. Then I filled it in. So it took probably 2 years to finish it. Yeah. And it's a prose poem, so.
It just seems so extraordinarily vivid an experience. Sometimes those feel like, how am I ever going to find the words for this?
Yeah.
For this moment.
Yeah. Yeah.
Although part of what's vivid about this is that little bit of dialogue.
Yeah.
My spirit went straight up. That just seems like grace, right?
Yeah, it was, and it's all that she said. And I mean, she took my wife and my daughter and held them and kissed them. But when I came in, she just, you can't. And then she went to the bookcases, which was extraordinary to me. Yeah.
You have more you'd like to read?
I'll read one more, and then I'll let you take over for a bit.
All right.
Okay? John Thompson was in my mind when I wrote this poem, although the visitant, the person who visited in the poem, probably was from the other world. That otherworldly feel you get sometimes. I live in an ancient house that...
You must have that feeling all the time then.
Well, you do, yeah. Yeah. Well, I've heard footsteps. Lights have been turned on and off. That kind of thing. A lot of... the first time I was down there alone, when I was in my early 20s, a whole group of Irish field workers, when I was in near sleep, walked through the room and went up to the other side of the wall.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
Wow.
So that was pretty neat. So this poem is about that kind of experience. It's called The Open Door. It was early autumn. I sat in the porch with one lamp only, working on poems. My wife was singing in the kitchen. My daughter played in the next room. The night was wild. Branches and leaves tossed in heavy wind, hitting the windows like someone from the other world trying to find their way back in. It seemed to me that the big white house was a ship plowing through the stars and the night, carrying a cargo that was as secret as human love itself. It was a night of song and leaves. It was a night when everyone was happy and in the right place. Something shone through the dark. Whoever was trying to get back in found an open door that night.
A night when everyone was happy and in the right place.
Yeah.
What a great feeling, the feeling of being in the right place.
It's you know how the whole room sort of hums, or the house hums, and people are there. Everything's right. Nothing's wrong. It was one of those nights. So.
I'm just thinking about a poem as maybe often trying to have that thing, everything to be in the right place.
Yeah, well, that's what it is. You're trying to place words, right?
Yeah.
And you're trying to, I mean, I found a poem of mine not too long ago that had the word light in it 7 times.
Right.
That had been published, and I thought it was fine. Until a friend of mine said, you know, you've got light a lot in some of your poems. And I said, okay. Because for me, light is a moment of transformation in the poems often. And it is in my life as well.
So how can you not write about light?
Yeah. So my wife and my daughter were in the kitchen when I was working on revising it for a selected, and we knocked it back to 2. We got rid of 5 lights.
Yeah, but light is a sort of a theme for you.
It is.
Where it's like a power. It's an image with power.
Yeah, it always has been. Yeah.
Can you say more about that, or is it
What's
beyond?
that?
Can you say more about that, or is it beyond words? Like what light means to you?
Well, I guess I had an experience when I was a kid, and I always associated light with the other world, with people in my family who were gone. I've heard my grandfather's footsteps a couple of times in the old house. It's 133 years old now.
And you know that these are your grandfather's footsteps.
Yeah, I remembered his footsteps. Yeah. And I think he's the one who checks the lights, too, on occasion. But, yeah, there's that feeling of a transparency between what we would consider our world here and what you might consider another world. So that the word light usually is a trigger for me, you know.
Yeah, it's like almost a moment where the other world sort of penetrates our world for a moment.
Exactly.
It's the moment of light.
Yeah.
I feel that.
Do you feel that too?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's neat, eh?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know that I have such a strong sense of like what that other world is or who's there as perhaps you do, but I still have that sense of like there's something more, right? And light seems to be that moment where the something more comes in.
Yeah.
Yeah, and poetry, of course, cares very much about that moment where there's like something more. So of course, light makes its way into your poetry.
Yeah. Well, I think poetry is as a container for those parts of ourselves that move toward the spiritual. Or it's not the only thing it can be. Obviously, there's many different ways of writing as there are writers, right? Poets.
For sure.
Yeah. But
So glad to hear you say that. Like, it's so easy to make dogmatic statements about poetry does this or poetry does that. It's lovely to hear someone say, Well, here's one thing poetry can do. But it is one thing poetry
It
can do,
is.
for
It is
sure.
one thing. It's not everything.
Yeah.
Yeah. So there has to be room for everybody's poetry house, right? And great poets, you know, are as different from one another as people are, you know. And so their styles bring what they write about and how they write about it, bring a different perception for the reader. And it's all equally important, I think.
Yeah, I mean, along the lines of hospitality too, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Let's make poetry
Again, to bring it right back to that again.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Let the room be room for everyone in poetry. But one thing I like to try to ask poets whenever I get the chance, because it's something I think about a lot, is the relationship to beauty and whether they have one. Do they care about beauty? Do they think it's a problematic concept in any way? Because it used to be taken for granted, right, that artists were making beautiful things. This is what we were doing. I feel like that's definitely less taken for granted now, just in the way that you say, you know, poetry does a whole range of things. So I'm just wondering for you, if you can say anything about whether you're interested in writing beautiful poems, or if beauty is important in your life, or, I mean, I've seen it cropping up in your poetry. So I was reading your poem about light, precisely. There are places I return to call all these particles of light up into the form of beauty. So I'm like, oh yeah, Allan has some interest in the world of beauty.
Yeah, I do, and yeah, I've been reading Rumi in Coleman Barks's translations for years, and he talks about beauty when we see something like a young child playing. If we see something in the landscape that draws us in, we say it's beautiful. If you look at people's faces at a moment when they're seeing something beautiful, their faces are transformed. And so I've been thinking about this because there's a lot about the friend, Shams Tabriz and Rumi were friends, and Rumi's poetry took off when they. But Rumi said, "The beauty you see in me is a reflection of you."
That seems very generous.
Yeah, but I think that when we see these moments between two people, or between a human being and a field mouse, or something like that, and the reason I'm saying that is I'm going to read a poem about a field mouse.
Beautiful.
After this.
But I kind of love what you're saying, that so say I'm experiencing something beautiful, I have that response in my face, and there's the beauty, right?
Yeah.
It's
yeah.
that like
and it's there.
being transformed by the beauty.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. You become the reflection of what you love,
Yeah.
kind of thing, or what you see.
Yeah. I like that, because then the beauty is like, it's not like contained within that thing over there, the field mouse, let's say, if I find it beautiful, but it's like, it gives, right? It shares the beauty with those who perceive it.
Exactly.
Yeah. Well, let's hear about your field mouse.
About
the field mouse.
Field mouse, okay. So this is a poem called Rose. In late November, I found a mouse lying on her side in the cold basement floor. She was only a couple of inches long. Her nose and her feet were a rosy pink, and her face was chubby from the milk her mother had fed her. She was as still as could be. I picked her up and held her, and the warmth of my hands must have woken her from her slumber. She kicked with her legs like a child in a cradle. I placed her in a small box and swaddled her in an old sock my wife had given me. I spoke softly to her, and her ears moved with each syllable of those words. Then I noticed that we were breathing together, slowly, breath after breath, as if there was some hidden bond between us. She took a long time to die. When she did, I carried her from the house to the garden. I held her up toward the cold November sky, and one clear shaft of light touched her face and her eyes that had never opened. For a moment, it seemed she was the face of everything, and I laid her down among the roots of the wild red roses.
Wow. That is a beauty of a poem. There's something so affecting about the light touching the eyes that have never opened, never seen the light. I really feel that. And then that moment of her face seemed like the face of everything. I don't know, that seems like what we're often after with poetry, is to find that moment where that whatever it is we're looking at just seems like the face of everything. That'd be a great title for a book, actually. Face
Well,
of
that's
Everything.
what I'm going to call it.
Excellent.
Thank you. That's a confirmation. So, yeah.
Thank you very much for talking with me about your poems and reading the poems. I wish that we could, in fact, talk longer.
We'll talk more another time, and I thank you too. I appreciate it a lot.
Terrific. Thank you very much. We're out.